Both gentlemen?
Oh, well, Paul Morrell. Thank you.
That was a bit scary, I thought. It reminded me of first day at school. You just know, listening to the headmaster, sooner or later you're going to be in trouble, and it could be quite soon. Now, I probably know less about BIM than anybody else in this room, so in many ways this is not sort of about BIM, it's why the government's looking at it and what it hopes for from it. And I brought along Mark Bew, because as soon as you ask me a question that involves an acronym, I'm going to refer it to Mark, because I'm prepared to bullshit in most kind of company, but not here. So I'm sort of going to set context, really. And Mark, as you'll know, actually was the prime author and the steerer of the government strategy that's being published, which he did at his days at URS, Scott Wilson, but he's now dedicated his life to BIM, as many of you have. So let me go. And the visual joke here is that's a London rug look, but I've also put a picture. I put a picture of a Revit thingy in there, so you knew that it wasn't all about carpet. A bit of context, first of all, and why we're interested, and why I think actually that sort of now is the time. We are in a time of huge turmoil, which on the one hand, is probably not a very good time to try and change. Most people seek stability in a time of great turmoil, but actually the one thing I discovered in the last 2 years, and I wouldn't have tried to do this job probably in any other environment, is people are having to pay attention. The government still needs to build, but it's got no money. The industry wants to build, but it's got no work. It should be the basis for some kind of slightly fractious relationship. And there is a preparedness to change. But if we look at the context, the first thing is the hideous events of 2007 and then 2008, and the fact that we now know, for those of us who had all their money with the Royal Bank of Scotland, became within 2 hours of losing every penny in the world, and that's how precarious it was. So we're now in this difficult situation of a highly volatile market, even without the euro. Bottom of the right-hand corner, that guy there is managing your pension fund, in case you're sitting there feeling all that. But these are, to say the least, difficult times. And we've got this quote of Liam Burns that wouldn't have been funny even if it weren't true. There is just no money. And I can't tell you how much the atmosphere changed in government in May 2010 after the change of government to the coalition, where everything suddenly got focused on money. If you look at everything through the lens of there is no money. And the other big pressure, I suppose, which is going to change our lives. Most of my working life, when things got tough, we pull the duvet up, hunker down, and wait for the good times or these better times to come back. That just isn't going to work, I don't think, this time around. There are big structural changes going on. Globalism we've been talking about for 10 or 20 years probably, but at the very least, the world is moving east. And the extraordinary impact of China, and as increasingly India, which will soon overtake China in terms of population, and to say the least, they've got the numbers on us. But also, I see huge significance in the first Chinese man in space, and the 300 million children in China who are learning compulsory English in school are not doing that so they can make cheap stuff to put in Christmas crackers. And any architect here, for those who feel that they're far enough up the value chain to feel protected, that must have sent a shudder through people's minds. The first full service commission for a Chinese practice for a project in London. So eventually, there is nothing they won't be able to do that we can do. And do it cheaper. So we have to do things better, at least just to stay alive. And the other big change is that I think you need about 5% of your population to feed yourselves. And any country that's got more than that working on the land, as many countries have, especially in Asia and India, the Indian continent, and in Africa, they're going to head for town. So coupled with that extraordinary population growth, the 7 billionth person arriving on the planet last October 31st, we're told by the United Nations, creates a spectacular pressure on infrastructure and on the built environment. And somehow or other, there's opportunity out there, but also a massive challenge. How do we house people? How do we shelter people? How do we provide the infrastructure which makes industry and our lives work? And then the final big driver, I suppose, and big change, is the whole issue of consumption. This is a Chinese chicken packing factory, one of thousands probably. And it's a kind of symbol of just the scale of consumption that we're now engaged in. And in our own world, that's a granite kitchen unit you've got at home. And we are excavating to the centre of the earth to find the stuff for this. I'm 63, 64 years old, and I don't remember a time as I was growing up when people said stuff might run out. It just wasn't a factor. We could consume, everything was about growth and so on. But we need a smarter game now to make sense of that and of the extraordinary impact of fossil fuels on the planet, whether it's here or increasingly in China and in the developing world. And of course, if China's emissions come up to the average in the universe, then we will double the amount of carbon which we're emitting to atmosphere, creating this extraordinarily a problem of literally a threat to the climate, and not to the planet, because the planet will be fine, but we won't be. And at the very least, that represents a new and rather perfidious form of waste which is going on. So we're caught in this kind of difficult place. Not enough cash, too much carbon, and we need new models. And we need new ways of managing that. And we've been saying that for a long time, but I don't think that anybody whose business plan is to wait for the old times to come back is in a very safe place. We need new everything and new stuff. And one of my favorite statistics, which I did from a report that I did for Peter Mandelson when I first arrived in government on the business of low-carbon construction. There are 26 million homes in the United Kingdom, of which 25 million will still be with us in 2050, and we have a legal commitment to get them to zero carbon. That they will make no net addition to the burden of carbon in the environment, and we're going to do that in 40 years. There are 21 million minutes left to the end of 2050, so we've got about 50 seconds a house, which at the very least you would say, in reality it's not going to happen, is it? But at the very least you would say is it's an extraordinary challenge. And we cannot do that with our mind alone. We need new technologies and new ways of doing things that speed things up and improve our batting average and so on. So a much better expression than Liam Burns is here at Mine Rutherford. And the idea that we have to think our way out of this. And we need the intellectual tools to do that. And we need an industry which is fit for the purpose, this new purpose. It's worth saying that we do kind of know how to do it. And we've got this moment later this year when we're able to celebrate an extraordinary achievement. And there's good stuff and bad stuff in the pits, and we're determined to learn both things. But overall, we've hit the numbers, and it's got all the basis for a pretty good-looking party in July, August time. But we don't seem to be able to do it on a replicable basis. And at the very least, you would say, do you think you could do that in this country? This is Japan post-tsunami. And I think the only way we could do that was by use of Photoshop. So technology in a different kind of way. So the bar is set very high, and not necessarily here at home. It's worth looking at some of the few big issues that we have to sort in the industry, and I'm really going to focus on one. Fragmentation, you might say, is an issue, and it gets talked about all the time. I actually haven't found it a huge issue that there were so many of us and so many organisations. It's a bit of a pain. And if you look at our structure, then it's more complicated than chemistry. And it's a very hard industry to find and to talk to. That's why I spend so much time out on my hind legs, I guess. Because the more you talk to, the more you might have covered most of the constituencies. But there are, at least 350 major organisations that speak to construction in the country. So how do you find them? But the much bigger issue is this, the sort of the siloed structure of our industry. And I'd like to focus on one issue with that. This is how I think we give out work in the United Kingdom. It's sort of kind of a hierarchy. You appoint a God designer, usually architect or engineer, who recommends a few co-consultants. And slowly the players come in. Now down here in the guano are the people who actually make stuff and the people who fix things, the walls, floors and ceilings, the people who do the work. And they are separated from where decision making is going on. So all the way down through that chain of the lack of integration. And it's born, of course, from to a very large degree. It's a fairly new concept. Lots of architects say they want to be the master builder again. And it's really only in Victorian times that we created this confection or a distinction between trade and the professions. And it's now quite deep-rooted nonetheless. And it does come from this Victorian idea that everybody has a place and should know it. This is a caricature done by Cruikshank, whom some of you will know, but it was a serious piece of lobbying by him against the idea of giving the vote to the working man, because the working man should know his place. And there's construction down at the bottom. I think we're just above chimney sweeps. But the idea that there is a place for us all is an idea that just doesn't work in the 21st century. But what it builds into the supply chain is oppression. And everybody trying to make his living by gouging it out of the next person down. And that's not a good model. And we know that no matter how much we cling to the idea that tendering and competition should force out efficiency, it hasn't worked in my working life, and it still isn't, on a replicable basis. The bargain too often gets broken and very rarely delivers real value. So we've got these fractures in our value chain. If you like Michael Porter's work, and I do, then our value chain is fractured between the design of a scheme and the management of the construction, between the management of the execution of the construction, in some ways one of the most fatal fractures, And between all of the above and the occupational use of the asset, where value lies. So value isn't being pulled through the process by use. And we have this relay race that starts, and in the way of relay races, we drop the baton, and that leads to waste and inefficiency. And we reinvent the wheel and we get it wrong. Bring forward no learning. Start again, every time. And some of that's perverse. The architects have said to me in my working days, I used to be a QS, as some of you know, I'm in remission there. But you used to say, no, we've done that before, we can't do that again. And everything gets reinvented, so no efficiency gets carried forward. But above all, you're separating yourself from where the money is. My point about the purchase. Where innovation can happen, or invention can happen, or where the money is being spent. And we contract in a very fractious way between a client and usually a main or tier one contractor, who every pound you give him, he maybe keeps 5 to 10 pence. The rest goes down the supply chain. So if you want to get real money back, it's not in the relationship with the main contractor. It's in the relationship with the whole supply chain. And so fundamentally, that needs to be fixed. And the last consequence of all of that, apart from cost and waste and so on, is that clients, instead of getting a soft landing that they get promised, get a hard landing. Buildings that don't do what they're supposed to do, often in terms of energy, and you'll know the work of people like Bill Bordas and so on that shows that buildings regularly, almost routinely miss their energy targets by at least 40%. And they're expensive or impossible to maintain, because there's no thought being pulled in from the back end until too late. So as I say, we're all the way. The reason we have such a fractious industry is because we've contracted ourselves in fractious positions. And very rarely do we find a way that we can collaborate around still a degree of competitive tension, which is the subject of another talk, really. And I don't want to do Joni Mitchell-Ludling, where we light candles, hold hands, it'll be fine. That doesn't work either. The costs just climb up as we feed risky and then spend it. But this hasn't worked for us. So we need an industry that is genuinely fit for its purpose. One of these is me, Barbara, but you have to guess which. So we're looking for killer apps. Couldn't find a picture of killer apps, same picture of killer apes, just because I kind of liked it. But you'll gather that we need innovation, new ways of thinking, new ways of doing things. That's not new, and actually there's far more innovation goes on in construction than gets celebrated. But nonetheless, we need more still. Collaboration, a cliche, but very rarely practiced that in truth. And really the means of achieving that, I think, is genuine integration. Things that bring themselves together and which feed in thoughts about occupation and use all the way from the very beginning of inception and right through the process. And we don't make every one of those connections competitive. We make it collaborative in the interest of the client. So we're trying to replicate the thing that we all know from our working days works, teams that are effective. But I was lucky in my working life to work with some fantastic teams, so much so, and for most of my working life, that when I went back to the way it used to be, I remember almost saying out loud once in a meeting where we were arguing once again about why the Dutch and the common want to be in the same place. God, I've forgotten how bad it could be. Now, how on earth do you keep it so you never have to have that thought? And how do you make contractors get a new idea about what the supply chain is? Instead of being opportunistic, get a job or an inquiry, you make a phone call. I often say to the bigger contractors, you don't have a supply chain, you've got a phone book. It's not the same thing. How do you turn that into a more collaborative, more advancing structure? What are the tools for that? And then we all decided we've got the answer to all of that. It's BIM. And suddenly massive moments of excitement. And we announced in October the year before last, that we're going to mandate BIM. Everybody got hugely excited. And so we kind of, I spoke at Autodesk conference this year. I was kind of disappointed there was the mosh pit there, really full of people ready. But the message there and here really is now calmed down. It's great. It's sort of viral degree of interest is truly great. And there are very few people arguing against this being the future. And in fact, I've said often, we will know we're on the right track when finally we find a constituency that's saying that's not the way to do it. But what actually is the way to do it? And how do we turn this now into the really hard work of turning all of those hopes and aspirations and all the BIM wash and enthusiasm and bandwagon jumping and so on, how do we turn that into something that really works and we don't lose the vision that people like you obviously have because you've invested in it, your own time and your businesses have invested in it, and turn that into, realize its potential. Because it's kind of hard to produce a decent virtual model, to have all the codes and standards by which you might do that and so on, but it ain't nearly as hard as what we do now, which is experiment at one-to-one in the wind and the rain. insanity of building something for the first time in 3 dimensions with bricks, when you actually can make it in a place where you can solve so many of the problems. No other industry would take that on. So looking from government's position now, some of the big decisions that maybe we'd be happy to help with, and the first one really is, why are we in there at all? What might government's role be? And it's worth saying that one of the perhaps changes that I made when I arrived at government was to start with the supposition you can't fix an industry from the outside. Post Egan and Latham and the like, government has spent tens of millions in sponsoring exercises and funding groups and so on and so forth to try and bring about change. If you want to change businesses, you must change the business drivers. So the first thing is we won't fix the industry by tinkering under the bonnet. And people that you're dealing with have to want to change their businesses for commercial reasons. So you do it from the outside. Secondly, as all of you know, this is not something you can buy in a box. And I think the first meeting I sat down on BIM when I knew zero, with Mark and a group, and somebody said, well, it's not about software. I remember thinking it isn't. Now I absolutely know that the software is the least of our problems. They're structural and they're cultural and they're everything else. So one of my biggest jobs is trying to join conversations together. And I actually characterized my job as this when I started. Trying to improve the quality of the conversations from the fractious and disconnected to something purposeful that does connect, and in BIM as in all others. And hence the strategy, which, as I said, Mark steered and authored, and which was mandated across government as the way it began to work, actually eventually in May last year, by Cabinet Office right round. And I chair a committee in government, by the way, in the Cabinet Office. I work in 2 departments, BIS and Cabinet Office. And that's a board of all the big spenders across construction programs in government. If that board thinks something is a good idea, I take it to Francis Moore. And if he agrees, he writes around the Cabinet Committee. And within 14 days, it can be, as happens here, it can be government policy. So a very fast route to strategy if we have good ideas. So what is the bones of the thing? Consistent with the idea that you can't reach under the bonnet, there's push and there's pull in the language that Mark used in the report. And the fundamental important stuff is pull. At the end of the day, as I say, you can't push stuff under the bonnet. The industry has to want to make a move. So how do you define and organize that? Well, the next principle we fix really is that complexity, difficult decisions, should stay in the supply chain. And that links to a point I'll make about not backing winners later on. Complexity belongs in the industry where innovation can run free and where business decisions can get made without constraint and so on. So the first thing the government can do is provide some leadership and some coordination. And this is about, of course, herding cats. But we've had a reasonably good crack at this. I described this structure which I chair and reports to Francis Moore. It covers the whole of the government programme and the whole of the infrastructure programme. And it has 2 steering groups that are led by industry figures, which was a novelty for government of itself. And it's something a very senior civil servant said to me, you mean we're going to get private sector people to steer public sector policy? Yes. Because that's our problem in this industry. We have to do it together. And there's a series of working groups, one of which drive BIM strategy. I'm going to spend no time on it other than to say, and you can find this on the Cabinet Office website, we've got a pretty good structure and a high number of people that are organized themselves around organizing government to become a good client in BIM, which is my job and the job of people that report to me, and also trying to help the industry organize itself to supply to government. So we have to push and the pull in those structures. Let's spend no time on that. So we've made a reasonably good job, I think, of at least grabbing the cats for a while. I have no doubt that they'll spin off all over the place. Next big decision is what's it for? It's for everything. It's for every project type, and it's for new and existing buildings. And it's worth saying that the government's prime interest in BIM is not about building, fascinating though that is. It's about the ability to manage the asset and the data to manage the asset when the job is complete. And that feeds to a point about the data what one actually needs for that, and the data one doesn't need for that, which I'll talk about later, very briefly. But fundamentally, it's about asset management. The government hardly knows what it owns and has a habit not to maintain what it owns. It needs the data to change that habit. And so hence, the one stage we're working on a second M here. It's not about modeling, it's about modeling and management. Management of the construction process, but above all, management of the asset. Who's it for is I think, one of the few places where I depart from the words of the strategy in many ways. It's not for the leading edge, because the leading edge will be often and done. and doesn't need any help from me. And I just know that the competition inside the industry will lead to this kind of stuff. And, God bless you, get on with it. No matter how many Ds you add is up to you if you think you can sell them and you think they're useful. As long as there's a starting core that everybody's doing the same thing. And they're not to me, they're not for the trading edge either, because people will fall off the back of the bus. So it's really about the whole of the middle of the field. So the job for us is to bring the middle of the field up. And government is concerned about SMEs and businesses in the middle of the pack because they're in all of the MPs' constituencies. There's an interest in making sure that these people are not disinherited on public sector work. And the next thing, I often wondered, how the hell do you learn to ski jump? At some point, you must have to go to the top and let go. So scary. So the next thing was you shouldn't have to do that to get into BIM. So we start with smallish steps. And I think I said, a year ago or more ago at Autodesk that the first step, all you need is the ability to use Excel. Instantly, some knowledgeable architect wrote about how crap Excel was. I remember in the RIBA journal, got that wrong. And when I spoke in Ireland, by the way, and said, all you need to know is Excel, well, the stage whisper about 3 rows back said, that's the architect's fault, which is a rather enjoyable moment. But there's a kind of maturity index, which perhaps we'll talk about in Q&A, of how we get from here to there, a series of steps. So my joke here is we're trying to get from builder's bum to builder's BIM in 5 years. That's your job and your plan. The next principle, and I sort of like this, is that you shouldn't make a plan around something that doesn't exist. So when Kennedy said they're going to put a man on the moon, he knew where it was because the turn up on Brown showed him. But also he knew that they had the rocket that could do it, the technology that could do it. And so we did not want to develop a strategy that depends upon someone inventing a rocket. Which is why when people say to me, why not full interoperative, 3D, fully collaborative stuff? Reason is because we don't know how to do it yet. And when we do, we'll mandate that. But slowly we'll get there. And that, I think, makes the point. So long as I've been talking about this subject, and long before that in my day job, people have been talking about this word that most of us can hardly pronounce, let alone actually deliver. It seems to be going on forever. And I'd like to share a theory about that, which is totally untechnical, which is the idea that everything should be able to talk to everything at any time to anybody. It sounds to me like we're trying to redesign the National Health System's IT setup. I just don't believe in big bang solutions. So I think what you need is that bits of data in there that need to find each other can find each other and know how to. I don't know technically how you do that, but when I talked to Phil Bernstein about it, he told me about a company they bought called Blue Glue, I think, which is working in this direction. And it seems to me more likely that thinking about when stuff actually needs to connect and making sure it does is a far more realistic scenario than anything at any time being able to talk to anything. So interoperability is, at the moment anyway, a necessary goal for the full 3D, fully collaborative thing, but not in the current plan. How can we make it happen? 2 ways: money. I think in this year, BIS, one of my departments, is putting about $1 million into stimulating development in BIM, largely about the government organising itself to be a client in that. And we're rolling out trial projects and the like that would do it. And we've got this series of work groups that were kind of in that graph that I sped by, looking at all the difficult stuff. But I just refuse to get bogged down by this. I spoke at a conference where I had 20 minutes to talk about BIM, and I was followed by 40 minutes by a lawyer talking about who owns the model. And not complicated. If you work for government, the Queen owns the model. We'll work the rest out from there. But nobody wants to rip you off. Nobody wants to build the building 1,000 times and not pay you again. Nobody wants to change anything from the existing rules. No one wants to steal your copyright and so on. So the brief to the lawyers is, make it the way it is now and make it work in this, rather than just dream of lots of difficulties and so on. And we want no-fault insurance models. We're talking to the insurers about that. Not anytime soon. But we need it for integrated teamwork anyway, and we certainly need it for this. A team that's looking over each other's shoulders probably isn't going to get to the same answer. But what's what the Americans call a cookie jar policy. You just want to reach in and help yourself to a biscuit when stuff goes wrong. So it's difficult to develop. That's part of the plan. Tools and methodologies is the next thing. I think beyond the fact that we want a shared platform, what we're not going to do is back winners. Government's crap at that apart from anything else. and probably choose the wrong thing. I often feel in my day job like a sort of low-rent Dragon's Den. People come in and say, oh, it's a fantastic idea. But you're telling the wrong person. I'm not buying anything. We're not specifying stuff. You do that, you kill innovation. You kill new opportunities and so on. So it's kind of helpful to have probably what we hope might be a benign market leader like Reddit. But it's not helpful to say that how it must be forever. And as I say, we'd probably back the wrong horse if we chose. And of course, the irony about Betamax is it was the right horse, but it lost. So who on earth would make that bet? One hope there is that there will be an app world. This is already happening, and you showed the DO stuff and so on. And the big conversation what I have with Autodesk is, open the platform and let people in. And you can think of thousands of apps that people will design. If you're going to make this room tomorrow, how many ceiling tiles do you need? How many tower cranes do you need to build a building? Whatever. You can think of lots. There won't be £1.99 apps, but there'll be £2,000 or £3,000 apps. Let people in and let innovation rip. But sharing the core data. It's about standards setting, finally. And the big question, and really my question to people like you is, what's the least one has to say and the least one has to prescribe to encourage convergence without killing innovation? What are the standards we actually need in the day job? Clearly we need standards for what comes out the other end, the whole issue of data drops and so on. So stage by stage, what do we need? This is plan of work stuff. What do we need at every stage? When it comes to construction, that's going to be a challenge. It's proving to be a challenge already. Because every contractor has produced a program with 190 operations on it and been criticized by the designer for it not being clear enough where the critical path lies or the operations missing and so on, but the designers themselves seem to have worked to a program that says design. So you need much more intelligent thinking about the process of design. So we can say, what do you actually need for decisions at every stage? And the work that Mark's doing in government departments is already revealing extraordinary fractures in the way that we do the job now. And there's some serious process mapping going on to say, so what does government need to decide whether to build a prison, what prison to build, when to build it, and so on, when to commission the next stage. So data drops hugely important, leading to the large package of information that we get at handover. And this is my point about the sort of soft landing stuff. Above all, what will we need to manage the asset? What data do we drop into the model? That's important. It might be cost, it might be carbon, it might be maintenance, there should be. But what is the sensible data to drop in? And I've got a qualification on that. I'm talking to a chum, an engineer, who came to see me because he said, you're holding me back. And I said, well, come and tell me why. And he described to me the spectacular work they were doing on gymnastic engineering. Sorry, it wasn't Arab. It happened not to be Arab. And I said to him, does it tell me whether I have to paint it or not? And he looked absolutely crushed. And I said, I really never need to know how clever the work that went into designing it was unless I have to sue you because it failed. What I need to know is do you have to paint it? What do you have to do to maintain it? And so on. So there's some bit of winding back here. Next principle, only ask for what you will use. This is there are so many things you could load into that model. And if they're never used, they represent a new form of waste. And that could easily happen. And we're terrific at building in waste into our process. And the subset of that is just because you can doesn't mean you have to, or that you should. And so the mad King Ludwigs exist in design and in IT. I'm just fascinated by how much you can load into stuff and the things that you can do with it. It will not be a big favour to the industry if we develop massive models full of useless information. And as a subset of the same point, a massive model is not much use to a client. Apart from the fact you will shut the internet when you send it. It's just, I want to know what I want to know. A model that shows me what I need to know. So as important as what you put in is what you take out. As important as data drops is dropping data when it's no longer needed or isn't needed for a purpose. I think that's key as well. So this kind of big bang world, as being a mistake, is a key theme for me, both in terms of interoperability, but also overloading things with data that will represent useless costs. We will never use the data again. And that's as bad as being drowned in paper. And we all know, if you asked me 10 years ago, what the first really big advancement in productivity that I'd made in my working life would be, it would have been email. If you ask me now, I ain't for sure whether email is productivity or whether it represents waste. So how do we stop it at the right point? Our Screencast data management systems, we need to know how to move this stuff around. Government needs to, there's a market failure in training generalists, and needs to start getting involved in training at every level. But from schools, that you'll know Autodesk is giving out sort of modified versions of Revit to schools on a free basis, trying to make customers way in advance. In the professions and on site, what do they need to know, and how do you use this tool on site? And America probably well ahead of us of that, taking screens on the back of fans and opening the doors and showing the scheme and so on. How do you get it down to the workforce? Communication is a big issue. How do we share knowledge? I won't pause on that any longer. And then, whether it's worth doing. How do you persuade customers it's worth doing? I get lost often, have you done the math to prove that this is value for money? I can hardly be bothered. You're so convinced that there's, you might as well cost, I don't know, traffic lights or gravity or whether the car's a good idea or something. I just don't see any other way at the moment of getting ahead. And you can see so much waste in the way we do business. That's the size of the price if you get it right. I just don't think you need to build a business case. And actually, interestingly, there's nobody arguing against it. Or practically nobody. I saw one, Owen O'Carroll, who does some work for the RIBA on procurement. And if you have that kind of cataclysmic view of the world, go and cut your wrists or something, I don't know. But the idea that technology is a restriction on creative ability is nonsense. And if it were, Autodesk or whomever will go and invent new creative tools that release that again. So there's no. I think, moving towards a conclusion, the big thing therefore is for a business that starts with what's been there and wonders where you can buy it, to a business which is firing on all cylinders, what does the journey look like? What do you have to do next? I think that's a big task for groups like this, and to get not just Revit users, but potential Revit users who'd like to be Revit users and whatever in to show them what the steps are. And the worst thing that can happen is we turn this back into another competitive race again of the old style. This is not a sport. It's not a race. In the end, it will be about what businesses choose to make of themselves, not what professions fighting for position. We must reclaim lost territory and all that shit. It's about what a business wants to be and how it chooses to be. And you see it already. If you look at this world that we used to know, ACOM, which of course bought my old business originally, I kind of used to know what they were. They were an engineer, tier 1 or tier 2, and Balfour Beatty, tier 3 or tier 4. That's their place. And then ACOM goes out and buys lots of businesses, finishing up with Tishman, and Balfour Beatty go out and buy lots of businesses, finishing up with Parsons and Brinkerhoff, and suddenly they're both tier 1 players, top-level players. That's what they're aiming for. So actually, just one very simple illustration of the fact that the world is moving around us. And the idea of knowing your place ain't going to work anymore. People are changing their place. I'm going to speed past this for time. But we will find more and more stuff. I worked the whole of my life as a QS without knowing that 45% of every steel fixer's time is wasted on site because he didn't actually have a smooth workplace to work to. And as we start to analyze things more and more and more, we will find all of this stuff. We'll find this waste and wash it out. And that's kind of embarrassing. Very quickly then, there will be big changes, which I think one needs to be aware of. I think that some things will get commoditized. If you can buy a door, why would you buy a door handle? If you can buy a door set, why would you buy a door? If you can buy a wall with a door in it, why would you buy a door set? And so on. We'll start thinking at levels of components increasingly, I think. And everybody has to have an offer. They have to have some prospect, something they lay out to their customers that operates in this world, a kind of bin store of the old kind. Actually a supermarket chain in Turkey, for those of you who don't. And if you look at the process of designing a piece of steelwork, making the steel, fabricating it and erecting it, all different companies, all complaining about what the other people did, you can see a world in which maybe the fabricator says that it's also complicated, I'll do the design. Maybe the steel maker says, if you keep the steel simple, I'll do the fabrication. Don't know. But all of this kind of stuff is going to start happening as we investigate workflow. Things will drop out and change. And you see it here. You see people developing products that is now affordable to so-called optioneer, to start developing whole products. This is a lively conversation going on now post-Sebastian James review. You develop a market for the whole product, design and construction. And then what clients do is work out what works for them and start specifying things as 3D objects. The professions tend to criticize that as flat pack. Angela Brady said to me in a meeting like this, this is flat pack. And I made her blush by saying, how much flat pack is there in your home, Angela? It's not that it's flat pack that matters, it's whether it's good or bad or not. And IKEA still with us, Habitat not so. The world is changing. And something that made a big difference in my working life was realizing that not one single manufacturer of radio valve finished up making microchips. They were too busy making a better radio valve. And I've got a feeling that we might be at one of those points in history. So keep calm and carry on. Do calm down. I used this slide in America, by the way, and the following morning somebody spoke and gave me the American equivalent. Sadly, that was the head of Zurich's insurance team, not working on construction. But what both of those things call for, there's a degree of leadership. At every level, industry, people like you, working out how we get to where we want to get to, setting standards, and as I say, above all, working out what the journey looks like and how little do we have to prescribe to get convergence, but allow innovation. That's me. I'm going to ask Mark to come and join me. And he'll answer the questions.